Hello and welcome back to my channel. I hope you're doing well. If you'd like to support the channel, links for my children's books are available in the description below. Okay, let's get started. There is a terrible curse affecting every aspect of our lives today, and that is terrible leadership. Today I want to discuss the actual art form of leadership, free from any political bias, and why it's so important that we understand it. From your job to your country, many of the problems we face today are often a result of terrible leadership. I'm sure many of you can easily pick out examples from motorcycle manufacturers who have had great leadership and those who don't, as it's always reflected in the final product. In terms of motorcycles, here are two really good examples on good and bad leadership. Emilio Scott sold up all his possessions and took off on his Goldwing around the world, documenting his journey. In that time, he covered over 1 million miles. The bosses of Honda heard of this, and when he reached Japan, invited him to visit them. To his surprise, when he took the Goldwing, the engineers completely rebuilt it for him and sent him on his way. Now compare this to KTM. When their camshafts started to fail, they first operated a policy of denial and blaming customers. Only under pressure did they eventually accept responsibility and start grudgingly accepting it. Now, how does this affect your perception of the two companies and the purchasing decision you may make in the future? Any organisation is defined by how its leadership acts, as that carries on down through the entire hierarchy. Any organised tribe of humans forms into a hierarchy, and the entire direction and well-being of any organisation is defined by the leadership. I'm sure everyone on this channel has many examples in their own personal lives of bad leadership, as it's incredibly common and never addressed. Most aren't even aware of the skill set required for leadership, and as a result, so many leaders are devoid of even the most basic leadership skills. I would argue there is really nothing worse than the wrong kind of leader in an organisation, as the entire direction and personality carries down through the hierarchy on all levels. It is, however, a skill that can be learned. It's not that we lack good people who could fulfill the role of leadership. Often those who could be outstanding shy away from the responsibility. This is often due to the examples they have seen in the past, thinking they will end up hated and disliked. They don't understand they need to step up to the benefit of everyone. Positive leadership's benefits are enormous. It could be argued that more than anything it affects the world to make it a better place. Many times your peers will try to dissuade you from pursuing leadership as they themselves fear the responsibility. There is a very unhealthy aspect to people that they will hold others back where they could be really effective. When people don't step up, this lack of effective leadership creates a power vacuum which is quickly filled by those who do it for the wrong reasons. People who pursue status rather than a genuine need to help. The worst kind of people get into the roles by nefarious means or the wrong reasons. They are often weak, status-driven, manipulative, and even sociopaths. There's a great book on this called Snakes in Suits by Robert Hare. I suggest you read it. Leadership must also be separated from the personality. Due to the chaos in the past, the term leadership is a dirty word in the minds of most people and has many negative connotations. People often can't separate the personality from the leadership, and this is often why our politics is such a mess. I personally don't think many politicians could lead a camping trip, let alone a country. I see very few examples of good leadership skill sets in any political party. Like anything, leadership involves a degree of talent, but also a key set of skills that must be learned. You can actually dislike the person, but respect their leadership skill set and talent. Leadership is about service and responsibility. It's not about power or telling people what to do. Managers are different to leaders. Managers tell people what to do, but a leader can convince people that what they should be doing is the right thing together for the greater good. In the book The Rules of Success by Napoleon Hill, he talks about the effectiveness of good leaders and that they surround themselves with great people, support, motivate and drive them, and this helps execute seemingly impossible tasks. So what are the key skills a leader should actually have? Humility. A leader should suffer more than those they lead. In The Art of War by Sun Tzu, there was a general who suffered with his men. He slept on the ground, he ate what they ate. One time he tended to the wound of an ordinary soldier, even sucking the poison from the wound. When the man's wife was told of this, she started weeping. Confused, they seen this as a great honour, but she wept because she knew her husband would die to follow him. The leader should always be seen to suffer most, which is something we don't see a lot of. Confidence. This can't be faked and must be genuine. People will see through faked confidence immediately. Humans have a unique ability to read a lack of confidence in a person. No amount of speeches or status displays can ever hide this. In Romania, back in the days of communism, and despite ruling with force, Nicolae Ceausescu was often mocked. Even although you could face being hauled off to a camp or worse, when people don't have confidence in a leader, as soon as something bad happens, the entire structure will disintegrate. A leader will be the person people look to in difficult times, and they must be the living example of confidence and strength to others. Strategic planning. Leaders cannot get embroiled in micromanaging. Leadership is a big picture, and it's a completely different skill set to that of managing. People will do what a manager tells them out of self-interest, but managing is a completely different method as opposed to leadership. Often managers are there to manage resources and execute tasks. So even if they are a good manager, when they become a leader, it's often found their skills are sorely lacking. Often they fail as they don't understand the skills required to be a leader. They just end up managing harder as is the only thing they know how to do. This accelerates their inevitable failure as they try to control ever more. A good manager will more often than not make a terrible leader. Persuasion. A good leader must be highly skilled in persuasion. I've produced another video on persuasion. I suggest you watch it. It's not enough to tell people what to do. They must be persuaded that what they are doing is for the greater good and having a positive effect. Persuasion is certainly one of the most important skills a leader should have. Charisma. Likeability will help in leadership, especially when there's hard decisions to make which could affect people negatively. People are far more likely to follow someone if they like them. It is, however, a double-edged sword, as people with lots of charisma can get others to do terrible things. However, they can also use it to powerful effect for the greater good. Any sort of leader will struggle if they don't have charisma, good or bad. In one of the leadership books I read, there was an example of a CEO of a large oil company. One day a group of protesters arrived at the front of his house waving signs and chanting. Rather than call the police and have them removed, he went to meet them. Immediately confronted by hostility, he took time to listen. He brought some tea and spent a good extent of time with them. After a while he befriended them, took on board all their points, and they left. Imagine how the optics of this looks versus exercising power and having them removed. This is a very good example of using charisma and explains why it's so important in a leadership position. Emotional control. When chaos ensues in an organisation, the leader must project stoic resolve and confidence. The occasional display of controlled emotion is acceptable, and this will help them be accepted by the tribe. One of the most astonishing examples of emotional control I ever seen was the captain of the crashed Concorde. Upon takeoff, a piece of metal that had fallen off another aircraft struck the fuel tank. On fire, unable to gain altitude and facing certain death, the tower radioed him and says, "Concorde, be aware your wing is on fire." With no panic and complete confidence, the voice of the captain responded with, "Roger that." He knew he was done for, but maintained composure and leadership facing certain death. This is the exact sort of person many would follow and believe in. Responsibility. In any healthy organisation, blame should only ever travel upwards. Often poor leaders, when threatened, will immediately start apportioning blame and covering their own ass. The first failure of a leader is when they start to apportion blame. You will never see an effective leader use blame other than for themselves. Lead by example. You will often see leaders make bold statements of status with no clue how it affects how they are perceived. Let me give you an example. There's a great political effort to reduce car use in London. With schemes like ULEZ, the political direction is one to force people out of cars and onto public transport or bicycles. The Mayor of London, however, rolls around in a blacked-out armoured Range Rover costing over £250,000. They will often cite security reasons, but this is a terrible optic to tell ordinary people to get on a bicycle while you're in a convoy of cars costing more than the average person's house. Even generally, you cannot tell people not to drive when you're using private jets. Humans will immediately rebel and ignore you if they see a double standard. Each example you give them either strengthens or weakens your leadership. Difficult decisions and how they approach them. A leader must develop a thick skin and cannot get involved in what people think of them. They must be able to make really big decisions which lead to short-term negative effects. Let's say, for example, an organisation on any scale is in trouble. Say, for example, the leader has to sack a fifth of the workforce to save the company. They will, of course, have a battle on their hands and be extremely disliked. It's their job to help people understand that they do not relish the decision, but they have to, as it will secure the long-term security of the majority. A good leader would approach this with gravitas and compassion. They may personally refuse to take a salary to secure more jobs, and they will absolutely act with humility and care. However, bad leadership in the same position to make a decision will take little accountability. They will simply say it has to be done, then afterwards award themselves a bonus, and also continue to make examples of status such as buying a new car. This will then be tended as they were brave in having to make difficult decisions. Just as an example of the sort of leadership I'm talking about, Ingvar Kamprad, which I can't pronounce, drove a 1993 Volvo for 2 decades and flew economy class while leading IKEA. How more likely are people going to follow him versus a person who gets a new Ferrari after sacking hundreds of people? Positive mindset. Even if things look very bleak, the leader understands he must project a positive mindset. If a leader starts to moan, complain, or blame, immediately the hierarchy beneath them will start to disintegrate. A good leader will show their abilities in the worst possible situations. Good times are no real measure of the effectiveness of a leader. It's how they deal with difficulties that shows their true worth and true skill as a leader. Leadership is a service. It's not about money or power. True leadership is acting in service to everyone in your hierarchy. A good leader understands that the well-being and care of everyone in the organisation triumphs their own. They must always act in the service of others. This is why people in office are often referred to as public servants, although this is rarely the truth. Their job should be to improve the lives of everyone in a country in a positive way and help where possible, but the truth is often very different. Discipline and example set. In a leadership role, a good leader understands that they are an example to others. The leader should not expect employees to work late while they are leaving on time, or always be on holiday while people are always working. A leader must always be mindful that every action is under scrutiny, and as a result, in everything they do, they must set an example. If staff on the low end of a hierarchy are on low pay, you're never going to get effective work out of them if you're posting pictures of your mansion and yacht on social media. They will do the job out of need, but they will never show any real loyalty, investment, or dedication. A good leader always holds themselves to a higher moral standard than everyone else in an organisation. You can immediately tell if a leader has strong discipline and people will follow them, even if they're not particularly fond of the person. A leader should always be admirable, an example others can aspire to. The military is heavily invested in discipline for this reason. Discipline can make someone admirable. If they are up early, running, working hard, people will definitely follow them. Failure. In any group, failure is inevitable at some point. A good leader never punishes failure. This is not effective at all. When failure occurs, they accept the responsibility of it and with a positive mindset set about fixing it and reorientating those involved. A good leader will see failure as an opportunity for growth within themselves and the organisation. A bad leader will lash out at all those involved. A good leader will also be the first to admit a mistake. This may seem counterintuitive at first, but it completely changes the way they are perceived by their followers. If they step up, admit a mistake, and immediately enact a plan to resolve it, then those who follow will immediately rally round and all work together to correct it. A bad leader will always try to make a display of never being wrong, but humans can easily see through this as weakness. Everyone understands no one is perfect and appreciate the difficulties in leadership. They are far more likely to rally around someone who admits their failings but works hard to change direction. Truly bad leaders never admit they are wrong and will blindly follow that course of action, only damaging their perception and standing in the process. Listening. A good leader should always listen, not just force their will on others. Those who follow need to feel like they are listened to. A good leader will let others speak and take on board all opinions, so they know all available information. They know this will enable them to make the best decision possible. Bad leaders follow their ego and simply tell others what to do. The followers may grudgingly go and do what they want, but it will never be the same quality of decision a good leader will make. The good leader's plan will be far more effective in execution as people feel listened to and they will feel like they are invested in the plan also. Trust. This is absolutely critical. Do people trust their leader to make decisions? Bad leadership will exude distrust and even encourage it. Good leaders realize a strong bond of trust is critical to any success. Any leader must always be aware of the trust within any group and maintain it with transparency. Leaders who act behind closed doors and avoid lower level interactions build distrust, and the foundation of any organizational hierarchy will never be as strong. If you feel at any moment the leader will sack you or even kill you, then your investment will never be the same as the leader you trust to look out for you or even sacrifice themselves to save you. If you ever find yourself in a position or offered a position of leadership, then the absolute first thing you should do is dive into understanding what a good leadership skill set is. You must understand that while it comes with responsibility, you can also have a massive positive effect for the good of others. Maybe even the world as a whole. Only by pushing out those who actively seek it for the wrong reasons and you taking on responsibility yourself can you make a positive change for those around you. As the phrase goes, evil succeeds when good men do nothing. Understanding a leadership skill set is important for everyone. It certainly is not looked upon in political circles with much value. Typically when you come to vote, instead of voting for a party out of loyalty or false promises, delve into the life of any potential leader and look how they live. Don't listen to promises, judge them on how they approach things. Do they enact any of the points I raised above when not in the spotlight? Are they disciplined, selfless, humble? Are they an example you would aspire to? It's quite simple when you start to understand the leadership skill set, and you will know that when you look at politics, you see none of it. These are only just some of the points. Obviously, listening to these, you will start to understand the points that would make a good leader, and you will know from your own experience what would make a good leader. It is pretty self-explanatory, but it's not really explained a great deal to most people. So now I'm going to take on quite a dark subject, so please bear with me. I also pick out this particular example, but I'm sure many of you have many examples from so-called leaders. This is an example of where leadership goes catastrophically wrong and can never be fixed after it collapses like this. In 2024, shortly after getting to power, the UK suffered the Southport attack. Little girls were brutally attacked in a dance class by a knife-wielding maniac. As details appeared, the world looked on in horror and sadness as events unfolded. This is the worst possible situation for any group to face, and it's in this sort of situation people most immediately look towards leadership for guidance. Shortly after, the Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, turned up and, followed by the media, made a display of laying flowers at a small memorial people had set up. Tensions were very high, and understandably the local community were deeply upset. This is a key moment when a leadership gets defined and sets the tone for the entire time as a leader. I don't think Keir Starmer or those around him fully understood the gravity of what he was about to do or understood the nature of leadership. As he laid the flowers, people started yelling and things got very heated. Immediately the community are looking to a leader to make sense of it all. He immediately fled. Obviously security got antsy and aided him in making an escape. However, he is the leader and he should have told them to stand down. This was perceived by everyone observing immediately that it looked very weak. The perceived weakness was what went on to trigger for weeks rioting and unrest. It came across as disingenuous and weak from the leader that as soon as he was in any sort of difficult situation, he turned his tail and fled. As soon as people realised that there was no leadership in this situation, all hell broke loose. To make matters worse, as riots erupted, he then went on TV and started apportioning blame. This was absolutely the worst thing to do. So people had seen him effectively run away and then from hiding down in London go on national TV and start blaming people. All this done to the situation was inflamed people further. It was one of the darkest times in recent years for the UK, so people now realise subconsciously their leader was weak, maybe even a bully, and they felt especially that there was no support in one of their worst times. Since these events, the UK has been in terminal decline. Civil unrest keeps growing, as do calls to remove him from power. His party's support has collapsed and they face annihilation at the next election. Rather than address his mistake, he's done what any poor leader lacking in a leadership skill set would do. He's resorted to the one thing he knew how to do, and that was to come down hard on people as a lawyer. He just used the law to clamp down on dissent. Since then, it's left him incredibly weak, and all his actions since have been battling this perceived weakness. Now, while obviously it's not right to riot, it was a case whereby a community faced the worst possible situation imaginable, so it was entirely up to leadership to resolve the situation. The riots were a typical human reaction to an atrocious situation, and I believe were triggered by this atrocious example of leadership. It illustrates just how important good leadership is. The first thing that struck me was a total lack of leadership skills. I assumed that even if he himself was devoid of leadership skills, then he should have at least had advisors around him to guide him. This led me to believe that at the highest levels of state they're pretty much incompetent and have no capacity to deal with anything. Most people would have thought, even if it was subconscious, they now know exactly where the highest levels of state are in terms of leadership. I've seen many bad examples of leadership, but this was certainly one of the worst. So if he had good leadership skills, how would he approach the situation differently? First of all, the perceived running away was a terrible optic. A good leader, calm and humble, would have stayed the course regardless. Despite the obvious danger and the heated situation, people needed to see an example of strength. He would have realised people needed to be listened to and could have started talking to people. Showing that strength and resolve, even in the face of an imminent threat, would have been the first step. Even if the group had attacked him, he should have stood and showed resolve, then taken the metaphorical high ground. He would not blame any of them, just say it's important we talk and resolve this. With calm humility, he could have spoken to those around them, singled out the less emotional and asked them if they could go and talk somewhere so he could listen to them. There would be no point in trying to talk to the most emotional as they were too upset, but there would have been those who would be more open to reason, and a leader could identify them and persuade them to come and talk. Even if security was a concern, when he stood his ground, people would have realised this and started to calm down. He could have moved people away to a cafe or similar location with the promise of listening to them. No matter how long it took, even if it was all night, he should have just sat and listened. That way the emotion could have burned itself out and the discussion could be had. All the time he was there, he'd be listening to people vent to him. There would have not been any rioting, and he could have held the emotional state of everyone until they calmed down. People would have wept, he could have hugged people, he could have shown some true humanity and strength. Once people had said what they needed to, no matter how long it took, he should have then asked for local religious leaders and community leaders to join him. Hold a vigil, pray, even if he's not religious, it's the right thing to do. A display of some emotion here would not have gone amiss. A genuine, solemn display of emotion for an awful tragedy. This is one instance where a leader should show some emotion, as it would help them connect with the humanity of others. People would have then felt listened to, and that he was a humble and genuinely caring person. Instead, it was perceived quite the opposite. He ran away, protected by his goons, to the safety of an office, then came on TV and lambasted and blamed the community. He then used force to exert control over the rioters. Since then, his leadership has been one of weakness. That failure to act accordingly has ruined his period in office, and he will never recover. You can even see this now when he's on the media. He looks afraid and out of his depth. Once that trust in leadership is broken, there's no other choice but to replace them. He should have only left after the situations had calmed down under his guidance. He then should have promised to return shortly after to speak to people again. His language should have been one of taking responsibility and doing everything he could to resolve it and working together. I believe that had he done this, he would have set the tone for his entire leadership. This would have led on to the entire direction and tone of the UK being different as it is today. By contrast, there's others in power who have had extensive leadership training, and this was immediately apparent. King Charles has definitely undergone some sort of leadership training, and he completely understood what was needed. Much like I said before, you need to separate the personality from the leadership skill set, and regardless of what you may think of him, he done the exact opposite of Keir Starmer. He went to the town, talked to ordinary people, expressed sadness, and made people feel listened to. I fully expect the royal family have extensive leadership training, as they always set an example to others. For example, they always serve in the military. Even although they've got status and wealth and no need to, it's expected they will all serve in the military. You cannot ask others to do what you won't do yourself. I am positive that had the Queen turned up instead of Starmer, she would have shown the proper resolve and leadership, and despite the danger, I have no doubt she could have handled the crowd despite her stature. Her very appearance would have changed the entire dynamic of the situation even before she spoke, because she really understood leadership. Often when you discuss leadership, people get very confused with personality, leadership status, and they don't fully understand that leadership in itself is a separate skill. So even if you're not necessarily a fan of the royal family, you can actually understand that they've had good training in it and can handle this sort of situation. Of course, it's easy to discuss it after the fact. We can never truly know how it would have played out, but I use this as a great example as the do's and don'ts of leadership in a worst possible situation. It also illustrates just how important leadership is to all of us in every facet of our lives. I have absolutely no doubt now that just due to the lack of a leadership skill set, Keir Starmer's days are numbered. However long it takes, he will never ever recover from this, and it will always taint his leadership forever now. When people are faced with bad situations, they want to see a leader that embodies the elements I mentioned earlier. If they don't have these elements, things will disintegrate very quickly, and that's one of the reasons the UK finds itself in such a terrible situation now. Unfortunately, in a situation where a country craves good leadership and guidance, it opens the way for the less salubrious members, driven by ego and status, to seek out the position, and often people will gladly hand it to them rather than studying their actual abilities and personality in leadership. So all we can do at the moment is hope that a good leader does come to the fore, someone of integrity and character and moral virtue, who has the right kind of leadership skill set to lead us out of the troubles we find ourselves in. I don't hold out much hope because I've never seen it very often. Good leadership is extremely rare, but it's important to study it and understand what goes on into it and behind it, so that you can make better decisions in your own life, not just in voting, but how you conduct yourself in life and how it affects others. Thank you so much for watching. It's great to have you here. The comments are absolutely wonderful. I love them. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you have anything to say, please add a comment below. I'd love to hear some examples of terrible leadership. I had far too many to list here, or the video would have went on for hours. Have a lovely day, and bye-bye!